In this presentation, I'm going to cover off all about Azure Backup. So there are three major types of backups that are available in Azure. The first one is files and folders. Now, files and folders is aimed at backing up a dedicated source, be that a workstation or a server, and backing up basically the data that is on there. So static files, static folders, it is unable to back up open files, running databases like SQL or Exchange. It's only designed to do files and folders in a very simple manner. The second one is Azure Backup for applications or services. Now, this basically includes the ability to have a console, a backup console, software installed typically on a member server, and then that can be used to target not only files and folders, but also services like Exchange, SQL, and SharePoint that are on premises. So basically, it uses an agent to install on the clients in the network. It will then back that up to a local disk and then can also back that up to Azure as well. So that's the next level up. It gives you that more power using a console. The final option is using full site recovery. Okay, so this is using things like Hyper-V replication to have a backup source or a copy of the Hyper-V machine in Azure. Now, if we look at files and folder backup, basically what it does is that it will take the data from a server or a workstation once the client is installed on there, encrypt that, send that over the internet, and put that into a recovery services vault which has been set up prior. So again, very simple, and you can configure this a number of different ways. You could have one lot of data going into one recovery services vault, or you could have multiple locations going to a single recovery vault. So again, you can mix and match to have the vaults as you want, and we'll cover off the pricing towards the end of the presentation to give you an idea of the impact on cost of having different vaults. Now, the steps that are required in BASIC to set up files and folders backup for Azure is to create a recovery services vault. You do that in the Azure portal. You then install the backup software on the client machine. You'll get that from the portal as well. You'll then configure that backup software to point to the location in Azure where you want the data to go. You'll then schedule a backup, and then you will have the data backed up. So let's pause the video there and pop out to our machine and just show you how that takes place. Okay, so I'm here on my virtual machine that I want to back up. So in this case, it's a 2012 R2 server. Now what I'm going to do is, you'll see that I've logged into my Azure portal. So I've logged into portal.azure.com. And what I'm going to do is browse through all the services that are available. And the one that I'm looking for is this one here called Recovery Services Vault. So I'll select that. Now you'll notice that I already have a vault created, but in this case I'm going to add a new one. I can have as many different vaults as I want. So this will go through the creation process. So I'm going to call this my number 2 vault. Okay, I can target a subscription. I can use an existing resource group, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new resource group into which this vault will be placed, and I'll also locate that in the Australian East Data Centre. Again, you can target that wherever you want. I just go create. You'll see that it'll submit for deployment. It'll take a moment or two while that backup vault is created, and then once it is created, we can then start using it. So to check on the status, we can click up here and you'll see that we'll get notification that the deployment has now succeeded. If we refresh the page, we'll see we now have our vault number 2. Now if I select that, go in there, you'll see that I'm now in the admin area for my vault. Now I can do a backup or I can do a replicate. So replicate is for the Hyper-V stuff. So let's go in and select the option up here to do a backup. We'll now be stepped through what's required to set this up. So where is our workload running? At the moment it's going to be on premises. And what do we want to back up? So for the initial one, we want to do just files and folders. Okay, so simple backup. We'll then get this message down here about setting up our infrastructure. So if we click on that, there are 2 things that we need to download. Firstly, we now need to download the client or the software that will be installed on this machine plus the vault credentials. So let's kick off the download of the agent. You'll see that it's very quick. And if we download the vault credentials, so we have those as well, you'll see that'll come down basically as a text file. So there it is down there. Now what we'll do is we'll now run our agent, install our software. So if we run this, this will now obviously configure, put on any additional software for us. We can then target the location, set up whether we have a proxy, install any additional software that may be required. Okay, so when that process has finished, we'll then go into the registration and the connection to our Azure Vault where we want to store that information. Okay, so that shouldn't take long to complete and install the agent for us. Okay, so now that that has finished, we can proceed to the registration. So this will register this server into the Vault so it can back up. Now, to do that, we'll need the Vault credentials, which we did download previously. We'll find those in Downloads. Okay, so again, you can download them as many times as you want, and they are valid for a certain period of time. So I'll pick the right one. Okay, so it verifies my Vault credentials. I go next. So I now need to generate a passphrase to encrypt and decrypt the backups on this server when they go into Azure. So the easiest way to do it is to hit generate the password, and we don't know what that password is. So what we do is we save that out to somewhere safe. In this case, I'm going to put it on the desktop, but importantly, make sure that you do save that somewhere else besides this machine, because if you do need to recover information in case this machine is not available, you will need that password to do that. Okay, so it's now going to register the server into the Azure Vault, set up the connection, and then allow us to do that. So if we do get that error, we simply just go in and register again, and we should find that it will process that without any problem. Okay, so again, if you do get that error, just go back and redo it. You'll notice over here, if I look at my Vault password, so here's my Vault password in this case. So again, make sure that you do save that out somewhere else. Now let me just go in and launch the Recovery Services agent now. So this is the software that will allow us to do backups. Okay, so it says Microsoft Azure Backup. We haven't got any backup schedulers yet, so we need to go up to the top right here and go Schedule Backup. We just select that option, and then we just basically follow through the wizard here. So what we're going to do is add the items, the files that we want to back up. So again, we can only back up items on this individual server. We can't reach across into the network with this version. So I'm going to back up just the user folder here. Okay, I can add items, I can remove items, and I can exclude maybe certain sort of extensions, videos or JPEGs if we want. Next, you'll see that I have the option to back up at maximum 3 times a day. In this case, I'm just going to leave it as the default setup to back up once. I can now set the retention policy, a daily retention policy, weekly, monthly, and yearly. Again, you can modify these to suit your requirements so you can recover quickly and easily from any time period. We also have the option to seed the initial backup using an offline version. So what we can do is we can click offline. We'll basically back up to a USB drive in the correct procedure. We can then ship that to Microsoft data centers. That will then be connected to the server. We can then basically import that information and use that as the seed for our backups going forward. So if you've got lots of data to back up, do an offline backup first, ship it to the data center, and then you can do obviously the deltas in between. But in this case, because we're fairly small, we're just going to do an automatic backup over the network. Okay, so it all looks good. I will now finish that and confirm. It will now schedule the backup for me. Okay, so what this actually does, so that's all closed. So if we now go out and have a look at the services on this server. Okay, so if we go out and have a look at services, what we'll find is that there will be a service running in the background here that will monitor obviously our backup jobs and look to do that for you. So here it is here. It's called the Microsoft Azure Recovery Services Agent, and you'll see that it is running. So that's going to make sure that our backup runs on the schedule that we've selected. And here's when the next backup is scheduled to run. Now, we can also manually do a backup. So we go into and select Backup Now. Okay, so we go Backup Now. Okay, so it's now going to go out and do a VSS style snapshot of our disk. It's going to look at the information it has in Azure. Then it's going to kick off the backup that. And it will take a little while, obviously, because this is our initial backup for this server. And again, any backup after this will obviously just be deltas. So again, let's just pause the video and come back when that backup process has completed. Okay, so you see that our backup has now completed. It did 272 meg and it is successful. We close this monitoring dialog box and we'll see over here that our last backup we get information over here. If we select view details, this will give us obviously the times, the amount of data. Now what I'm going to do to illustrate the fact that we're just doing deltas is I will run another manual backup immediately. All right, so we're doing exactly the same backup again. And what we should see when this runs is obviously a much shorter backup, because obviously it's only backing up the changes that have occurred since we did that initial backup. So obviously once you get the first backup in place, depending on the data that changes, then the next backups generally are much smaller. So again, let's just pause that and let that backup process complete, and then we'll come back and have a look. So as you can see, the job has completed and all we backed up was 3 or 4 meg. So again, obviously we now have 2 backups, and again the second one is just a delta, or what's changed from the first one. Right, so we've now got 2 backups that we can restore. So what we're going to do is, if we want to recover data, we go up to the recover data option up here, and we can specify whether to recover it to this server or to another server. If we do it to another server, we'll need the vault credentials and also the password we created earlier. We go next, we're going to browse for files. Okay, so in this case I've only backed them up from the C volume. Okay, so I've got 2 backups here on the same day, so I'm going to target the most recent. I can then drill in and find a file that I wish to restore. So what I'll do is I will go in and select this one file. So I'm just going to pull this one file down. I can restore it to an original location, or in this case I will target it to a temporary location, just being on the desktop. I can then determine what happens if I get duplicate copies, or if there's an existing copy, and whether to restore any permissions. So in this case I'll leave that as default, and I will simply go recover. So it kicks off restore job. It'll go out, obviously read Azure, pull in the data, and then download that directly from the internet. So again, let's just pause the video and let that process complete. Okay, so we will see that the job has completed. So if we close that out and minimize this and go and have a look at our desktop, you'll see that we have basically a folder structure here that was restored from our backup, and you'll see here is the file that we restored, 64 KB as expected. So remember, the way that we did this is that what we did for files and folders is we went in and we created a recovery services vault. Okay, and then what we did is we went into the backup option here, and we then targeted the workload to be on premise, and in this case the basic files and folders. We then downloaded the required software, the client, and also the vault credentials, configured all that up, and then basically got this console configured and scheduled a backup, then did a manual backup, and then we did a recovery. So that's how easy it is just to do files and folder backup with Azure. So with that, let's get back to the slides. So the next option that Azure gives us is an application backup. So the application backup can do the data on a server and a workstation as before with files and folders, but it can also do network shares. It can also do Exchange, SQL, things like SharePoint, running applications and services typically via an agent. The way it does this is that it controls this through a backup console. The console uses the Microsoft Data Protection Manager software to create that backup, manage that backup, schedule that backup. Now, you receive that free as part of the application backup for Azure. You just need to install that on typically a member server, and then configure the backup, and that will then allow you to back up to local storage, so it can store the files to a local area and then encrypt those and send those to a recovery vault, as the files and folders backup has as well. So the steps to basically achieving this is, again, we create a recovery services vault, we install the backup software on a backup console, we configure the backup software to point to the vault, we target the network resources, because our application backup in this case allows us to target multiple items across our network, and basically then we would schedule a backup and run that. So with that, let's pop out to our machine and take a look at that. Okay, so I'm back here at my Azure portal. Again, the first steps in this case are to create a recovery services vault as we did before. I won't create one, we've already got one in place, so I'll select the one that I just created, and in this case I select backup again. But when I select the workload, again, I make it on premises, but what I want to back up, I want to select either Hyper-V, SQL, SharePoint, or Exchange. So in this case, let's select SharePoint, and you'll see that I get another prompt here to install the infrastructure. Now, if I select that, it's very similar to the files and folders. I'll need to download and install the Azure Backup Server and the Vault credentials. Now, if I click the to download the Azure Backup, you'll see it takes me to this link here to a site for Azure Backup software. So if I download that, for example, you'll see that these are all the files that are required. You'll notice that these are quite large, adds up to about 3 gigs in size. So this is the Microsoft Data Protection Manager, and that will then be installed on the member server so that you can then run the backups. So let's pause the video and just jump across to that machine where that software is already installed so we can take a look. Okay, so I'm here on my member server. As we have a look, in this case we have a network. You'll see the network has a domain control in this case with a number of shares, and the Data Protection Manager console with a share that has been installed. All right, so we are on a network here. So you'll see that when the Azure Backup is installed, we get 2 icons, one for PowerShell and one for the console. So if I run the console, you'll see that this is basically what it looks like. So I need to go into protection, and I need to go new, and basically work through the steps here. Now, I'm not going to go through this and configure it all because it does take a little bit of time, but I'll give you an indication. So I can target servers and clients if I want, and if I go next, you'll see that I can see my domain controller, and I can also see my local monitoring backup console. So I can obviously back up any shares that are on that domain controller. I can also back up its system state, and because it is an Active Directory domain controller, you'll see that I can also include including the Active Directory. So the important thing here is that the Azure Backup for Applications basically runs on typically a member server, allows you then to target network resources such as files and folders, shares, but also things like databases, SQL, SharePoint, even Exchange servers, and then you can then back those all up. So let's go, in this case, just go a few steps into it. So let's just say we want to back up the AD. We go next, and you'll see here now I can set up to backup to disk, right? Again, if there are other options there, and I also want to do online protection, which will then send it to Azure. So all I need to do is obviously work through this wizard that will create a backup, schedule it, and run. But I'm not going to go into that because it is a fair bit of detail. So let's go back to the slides. The last option that we have when we're dealing with Azure Backup is to do site recovery, right? So we have a number of different ways of configuring this. We can obviously set up a primary and a recovery site and use the Azure Site Recovery to be a channel between the two. We can also set it up so that the primary site basically uses Azure as the recovery point, so it backs up the virtual machines into Azure directly, so it's protecting it directly with Azure. And it also now supports the ability to do VMware. So not only Hyper-V machines, we can also do VMware directly into Azure. So Site Recovery gives you basically on-premises to on-premises options using effectively Azure as the channel, and also protection directly to Azure if desired. So the way that we set this one up here is a bit more involved. Again, we just need to start with creating a recovery vault as usual. We then need to look at going out and a configuration server, registering that with the vault, doing a master target, on-premises process server, and a protection group. Set up the machine you want to protect, and then obviously enable protection. So again, we're not going to cover that in great detail here because the steps are quite involved, but let me just pop out and show you quickly where we get that in the Azure. So I'm out here again on my Azure portal, and again what we would do, we would go into and create a recovery vault, but we've already got one, so let's go into that. And you'll see in this case, instead of selecting the backup, I want to select the replicate option. Okay, so the replicate now will take us through the steps required to set up our infrastructure to do the Azure Site Recovery. Okay, so again, make sure that you follow the steps that are indicated here. Now, the other thing that we've got obviously is the ability to monitor our backup jobs, look at our usage, and if we need to, we can go into the settings for our backup vault, and we can see what's being backed up, what's being covered by Site Recovery, look at the properties, look at the jobs, look at any alerts or events that happen. Okay, and obviously we can look at the protected items and so on. So again, it gives us a lot of flexibility when it comes to managing the backups through the console. So let's go back to the slides and finish off the presentation. So the next question comes around, how much does all this cost? So Azure Backup is broken up into basically a cost per instance, depending on its size. So for a 50 gig instance, it'll cost you $5. So this is basically how much a recovery services vault will cost. If you have 3 vaults, obviously it's going to cost you 3 times $5. Whereas if you have one, only the $5. You then also need to pay for the storage consumed. Okay, so it's basically $5 for under 50 plus the storage that is consumed by that backup. Now, how do we work out the cost of storage? Again, this is typically broken out in Azure, and it depends on what option, whether you've gone for locally redundant storage, zone redundant storage, or globally redundant storage, and the prices obviously vary between different regions. So these figures are given in Australia. It's also important to note that there is basically a small fee for transactions, which is noted down the bottom. So you need to take that into consideration when you're doing your calculations. So in essence, it's quite easy to set up the 3 options that are available in Azure Backup. It ends up being quite cheap to be able to set up and do this. And again, it's certainly highly recommended, and it's a very good first step to getting familiar with using Azure. Now that says, I'll point you to some resources that are available here, how to get started with the file backup, the application backup, the virtual machine backups if you want, site recovery, and also the area to import and export that first backup if you need to ship it to Microsoft data centers. Please also don't forget to take advantage of the other resources that I have made available out there. You can subscribe to any of these. Really appreciate you doing that. If you've got any feedback, please don't hesitate to email me, director@ciaops.com. But with that, I thank you very much for watching this video.